I'm thrilled now to introduce our next speaker, who's going to talk about the research findings from our Sustainable Market Share Index. Really anticipated every year, and Randi's amazing at doing this work. She is, Randi Kronthal-Sacco is Senior Scholar at Stern. She has over 25 years of packaged good experience, including 18 years as a senior executive at Johnson & Johnson, and she is also a proud Stern alumna. So welcome, Randi. Glad to have you here.
Good morning, all. I am delighted to share the latest installment of the 2023 Sustainable Market Share Index. For those of you who are new to the session or new to the work that we do on the Sustainable Market Share Index, the background is, so quick primer, the background is that 5 years ago when the center started, we asked what every good business person should ask, which is, what is the share of sustainable products? And there just wasn't any data. And that question fueled the Sustainable Market Share Index, which we report out every year on the actual share, actual consumer purchase of sustainable products, because there was a lot of data on and discussion around a green gap, a difference between what consumers say they're going to do and what they actually do. And this actually delivers the transactional data. How do we do that? We partner with Circana, formerly IRI, and they receive every scanned item in consumer packaged goods, from food stores to drugstores to mass merchandisers like Target or Walmart. We look at 36 categories, which represents about 40% of the US, so huge, very little standard of error. We've now looked at this for over 11 years. We have 11 years worth of data. And we look at this, put all these products into two groupings, either sustainably marketed, where they say that where there's a claim on the package that suggests this is more sustainable than conventionally marketed, the other bucket, where there's no claims. And you see some of the claims here. So I am delighted to share 2023. As you saw on Tansi's earlier slide, 2022 was at 17.3%. We grew, I'm now a we, sustainable products grew 1.2 percentage points, which is huge on this space, to 18.5% share of market. I wanted to do another cut of this year because private label or store brand has been growing. And private label comes to us as an aggregate. So while I know that there is a lot of sustainable private label or store brand, we have to put it into conventionally marketed products because we don't see the visibility. We see no transparency. And as an academic institution, we want to be more conservative. So this time I wanted to remove private label or store brand to see what the share was. And so now we're just talking branded products, but you'll see it's about 80% of the market. And what you see is that without private label, we're over a fifth at 21.2% share of market and up 1.5 percentage points versus a year ago. And that's on the right. Okay, let's now take a step back and look at the macro picture. So private label, which you'll see on the left, grew 0.4 of a share point versus last year. And this is all because of inflation. And the year prior, it grew 0.7 of a share point. And private label prior to that had sort of been about 18% or 19, 20% and flat. Now it's growing 1.2 percentage points in just 2 years. So private label is up. Sustainable market share ex-private label is up. So who's getting hurt? When you look at a total pie of 100, the conventionally marketed products are the ones that are getting hurt. And so my key takeaway from this is that sustainably marketed products, besides being a growth engine, have been more insulated from inflation and inflation-based pricing actions. Also, when we look at the CAGR, the 5-year CAGR, year-on-year growth, sustainably marketed products are growing at 10%, outperforming the market at 7%, and outperforming conventionally marketed products at below market rates at 6.4%. So again, growth coming from sustainably marketed products in consumer packaged goods. Okay, this is a micro look. These are the 36 categories that we look at to do the sustainable market share. And we bucket them into 3 groups. Low share development, so that means sustainable products have low shares in their respective categories, moderate shares between 5 to 20 in the middle, and high shares above 20%. And we had opined from the start that regardless of where they started, they would be moving to the right, growing share. And that's exactly what we're seeing. And those are all the arrows that you're seeing below, originally where they started and where they've ended this year. The only anomaly is toilet tissue, and that's because everybody's buying private label or store brand toilet tissue. But in terms of branded, almost all toilet tissue is managed through responsible forestry. The ones in green that are highlighted are ones that have jumped buckets. So they've gone from low to medium, medium to high, and in some cases, low to high. And why is that? Two things have been driven that. One, a sleepy category has been upended because a new player recognized that there was no sustainable leader or sustainable player in the market. And you see that in deodorants and toothpaste and diapers. Sleepy category, new product came in, upended the category, and then the category responds. The other way that you saw them jump is that a category leader adopts a sustainable supply chain and communicates that to the consumer. And we see that in all the dairy products, we see that in all the personal care products, and in the past year, we saw that on cookies. An unnamed leader that happens to be made with 2 chocolate wafers and cream inside is now talking about their sustainable cocoa. So what you just saw was all the transactional data, but we also want to understand who's buying the products. So this is a bit of an eye chart. Let me explain what it is. We looked at 4 cohorts. We looked at generations. We looked at, so younger to older. We looked at income. We looked at education, and we looked at urbanicity, so where people reside. The more green that you see, they statistically significantly over-index sustainable purchases versus the average household. Where there's yellow, it's equal, and where there's red, they under-index. And what we found in general is that the younger the household, the more likely they are to buy sustainable products. So this is actual purchases. The more educated, so it goes from postgraduate down to just a bit of high school. The more affluent they are, the more likely they are to buy sustainable products. And as we saw from the charts that Tansi showed, sustainable products are at a 28% premium versus conventionally marketed products, so it's not surprising. But the caveat is that for Circana, high income is $70,000 household income and above. So we're not talking about the Bill Gateses of the world. We're talking about somebody who's making $70,000. And the more urban, so they live closer to the cities, they're more likely to buy sustainable products. We did learn through some academic research that we did that the availability of sustainable products in rural areas tends to be low. So I think this is largely just based on availability. I want to spend a second talking about the bottled water category. We don't look at packaging in the sustainable market share, and that's because the availability of 100% recycled material is low, and that sometimes it tends to be very volatile and change, and it's just impossible to measure. But I do regularly get asked the question, what's happening with packaging? And so we looked at bottled water. It's something which is not one of the categories in the Sustainable Market Share Index. And what we found is that in 2018, 35% of all plain bottled water products were made with 100% recycled material and communicated that to the consumer, so it was on the package. In 2023, it went to 72%, which says that the value of consumers and concern and the media putting attention into the plastic bottles and ocean-bound plastic, all driven by bottled water companies, it has made such a difference. And the market leaders have responded and changed the category. So I hope what you take away is that the sustainable products continue to grow, they outperform the market, and outperform conventionally marketed products. One common theme that I hope you heard as well is when the market leader adopts a sustainable supply chain and communicates it to the consumer, it becomes table stakes for the category. So how do we get to 50% from 21%? How come more categories haven't moved? Well, one of the reasons is the backlash that Alan touched on. One of the reasons is concern about alienation. But also, there really is a dearth of data on what you should be messaging to consumers to get them to purchase a product. And so we engaged in a fantastic piece of research with Edelman, and I would like to invite my discussant up to address effective messaging. Let me just give you a quick background on Richard Edelman, my discussant, and there are too many accomplishments to really elaborate on, but let me talk for a second. Richard's the CEO of Edelman. It's the world's largest PR and communication firm, and he operates in over 28 countries. Among his many accomplishments, Richard has extensive experience in marketing and reputation management. He's worked with all major corporations. He's counseled countries in every region of the world on economic development programs. And as the creator of the Edelman Trust Barometer, Richard has become one of the foremost authorities on trust. And he's regularly cited in Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, Fortune, Forbes, and other media. And with that, let me come over and sit with you, Richard. Okay, for the topic at hand, how do you communicate to consumers about environmental sustainability in a way that will drive purchase? Richard, before we start, I'm interested in understanding what's expected of business. As you said, you were just at COP. You put out the climate report. You put out the Trust Barometer. What's expected of business, and why are you interested in this topic?
So let me try and lay out a landscape of trust, because we've been doing the Trust Barometer for 24 years, 28 countries. So first point to know is historically, NGOs were the most trusted institution for 19 years. Then during COVID, it became government. Then the last 4 years, it's been business. Why? Because business is seen as profoundly more competent than government, 50 points more, and more ethical, 30 points more ethical. In fact, equal ethical to NGOs and far ahead on competence of NGOs. Now, this puts a huge burden on business because, in fact, business is expected to fill the void left by incompetent government on everything from sustainability to diversity, equity, and inclusion to geopolitics, gun control. I could keep going. And so the question is, actually, ask not what my country can do for you, but, it's what else can business be doing, as opposed to let's do this in partnership with government. It's government's incompetent. That's the basic perception. The second thing to know is there's a huge divide between mass and class on opinion towards institutions. And this has really happened since 2012. It first started in the UK, in France, and in the US. And you saw what happened with Macron and Trump and the Brexit, et cetera. But this mass class divide has become transversal. And what I mean by that is 25 points in Saudi Arabia, it's 20 points in China, et cetera. This mass class divide is very significant because the bottom quartile has low trust in institutions. And it's manifested in everything from vaccine acceptance to the willingness to accept an energy transition, partly because it's affordable, et cetera. The Third thing I want to talk to you about is the battle for truth. There's a clear divide. The first stage was thought bubbles, left and right. Now there's a clear sense that leaders lie to us. 2/3 of people in our study this year said everything from senior journalists, sorry, Phil, to presidents of countries, to CEOs, lie. They intentionally lie to deceive us. So we're in a place of kind of, we don't know who's telling us the truth. And we're all uncertain and nervous. And I think the fourth thing that's really important to understand on trust is the logs on the populist fire are, yes, we have a lot of fears. The first fear, by the way, is climate. I'm sorry I'm being so long-winded, but this is important. The first fear is climate. The second fear is job loss. But the first fear is climate change. That's amazing and profound and an opportunity. But there's a further log on the populist fire, which is we think that innovation is proceeding too quickly. Now, you should say, well, how is that? Innovation is inherently a great thing. No, it's not. No, it's not. In fact, a lot of people believe that innovation will change how they live. And that makes them nervous because they don't have any sense of what the house is that they're moving to. They know that this house is destroyed, but this one, who knows? My privacy, my rights, all this other stuff. So, and I guess the last thing I want to tell you about innovation is, unfortunately, it's become politicized. Republicans are 40 points less likely to accept innovations such as an mRNA vaccine, an EV, GMO foods, et cetera. It shouldn't be politicized, but it is, because what Republicans state is, you are taking away my freedom to drive a car, my gas-powered car. You're interrupting my freedom to choose a vaccine or not. Too much government, too much intervention. So again, our goal when we discuss this is, this can't be political. This has to be good for business and good for people.
Wonderful. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes taking you through the research that we did together. As background, in terms of methodology, we partnered with 9 iconic leaders in the category. If you recall from my conversation, I was talking about that more category leaders need to adopt sustainable supply chains and communicate it to the consumer. But they have limited budgets, and they need to think through what they're going to say and how they're going to say it in a way that's going to drive purchase. And we wanted to understand whether environmental sustainability was one way that they could drive purchase. These 9 brands are all Edelman clients, if I can say. They were not born sustainable. We looked across industries, so we looked at tech, we looked at apparel, we looked at household cleaning products, we looked at food. Brands such as Dove Chocolate, Dove Body Wash, HP, the North Face. And each brand got a custom study. And each study had environmental claims, but also what makes it really novel is they had core category claims. Because we weren't interested in knowing what the strongest environmental claim is. Again, with limited budgets, we need to know, is this worth them discussing? So how does it compare to core category claims or category reason for being, such as the product for food tastes great, or for a cleaning product, it washes my clothes well, or it washes my body well, or it's a strong performing computer. So how did these environmental claims stack up? And we were delighted to see this result. So sustainability, environmental sustainability operated as an amplifier. So if you could only say, and this is across all 9 brands, again, not born sustainable, if you can only say one thing, you should tell them the core category claim, that it does wash your clothes well or it does clean your body well. But if you can say 2 claims, the second has to be or should be an environmental sustainability claim. So for the way you read this chart, if you only talk about the core category claim, tastes great, you'll get 44 of every 100 people to be interested in your product and purchasing your product. If you add to that core category claim, just one environmental sustainability claim, it goes to 60 out of every 100. And if you can say 3 things, a core category claim and 2 environmental claims, it goes to 74%. And so across all 9 brands, 30 percentage point increase, which suggests that it significantly increases your potential target audience and strengthens your positioning. Now, not all environmental claims tested equally. What we found is that consumers are really egocentric, so that should not surprise us. It's about me. And in fact, Marketing 101, since we're in a business school, there's an acronym, WIFM, what's in it for me? Well, that holds true for sustainability. And the 3 categories are my health, my wealth, and my personal world. What does that mean? My health, across all 9 brands that we tested, absence of toxic ingredients, that are harmful to human health. My wealth, help me make money, help me hold on to my savings. So for products that use less energy, if you talk about the fact that it adds dollars to my pocket, really strong. If you talk about less energy for less greenhouse gases, low. But if you talk about less energy, less greenhouse gases, and it gives you money, top performing claim. Or in that same bucket is around durability. So there's fewer dollar outlays, so my wealth. And then my personal world. Children, anytime you talk about children, that really drives performance. And in this pet-demic world where everybody now has a pet except for me, anything around animal welfare, top performing claim really resonates. And my personal world, which means my local farmers and my community. So my health and local sourcing. So my health, my wealth, and my personal world. And this shouldn't be surprising because, as I said, consumers are egocentric, but it also is about me and the humanity, and that's common. What didn't do well? The science. So anytime you talked about without an end benefit to deliver my benefit, the science didn't do well. So air pollution or biodegradability. But if you could link those same claims, air pollution so that I can breathe better, really 20-point difference, percentage point on average difference. But air pollution by itself, low. And I think that's interesting because for decades, sustainability marketers thought if you just tell them that buying this product will save the world, they will come out in droves. And this says no. You need to tell them how they personally benefit.
Randy, just on that point, fundamental to explaining messaging is it has to be understanding dispersion of authority. It is no longer top-down. It is peer-to-peer, or it's local. Not top-down, peer-to-peer, or local. And that means science matters less. Unfortunately, COVID has hurt science, and it has increased the power of pastors, pharmacists, my doctor, people who are close to me, and even my company newsletter, which is the most credible source of information.
Fascinating.
It's fascinating because it's seen as apolitical, a COVID benefit.
The second, thank you, that is fascinating. The second is traceability, just not, if you can only say a few things, traceability is not one. Certifications, so certifications didn't do well, and I do want to caveat this before everybody who's in certification business heads explode. The thing with certifications is we know they're important. It works, as I showed the Sustainable Market Share Index. Those are the certifications are the claims on package that make people understand that that's more sustainable. But if you're talking to a consumer, the best thing to do is tell them how it impacts them and use the certification to support that. And given all the regulations coming out of Europe and California, you're going to need those certifications to ensure that there's no greenwashing. And then finally, packaging was low, with one exception, similar to what we saw in the bottled water data that I shared. If you say 100% made with 100% recycled material, it was a strong performing package, but everything else, a strong performing claim, excuse me, but everything else, poor performing. So Richard, I think that's, yeah. And here's a QR code to the full report. What did you find particularly impactful or surprising with these results?
I think the first one was the amplifier effect. The idea that, okay, this product performs, like washes your clothes. But the sustainability claim of, but it does it in 15 minutes, adds as much as 35 points to a brand's position as being considered. That's massive. Really important. Also, I guess I wasn't totally surprised about the extent of, I care about me and not we, but the me part, we have to say in an elegant way. Yes, I'm in favor of a better world, but it damn well better cost the right price, and it better also perform. I think those were my first big takeaways.
And I think one thing that you asked us to look at that really was fascinating is the three groups, my health, my wealth, my personal world. There was no polarization. They were appealing to left-leaning people and right-leaning people. It was appealing to old and young, appealing to different races and genders. And that, to us, I think, was fascinating, which was something you had brought up.
Yeah, I mean, look, the myth is that Gen Z is so much more predisposed to be pro-eco. And in fact, Tansi, one of the statistics you had up there for people my age category, sort of 60s plus, is less predisposition to buy sustainable products. And yet, the inclination or the openness to do so remains that for all age groups. And it's not politicized, and it's not based on education and all this. So I thought that was important.
Yes, thank you. So speaking of Gen Zs, you have a Gen Z lab, and there was some data that's interesting that suggests Gen Zs are a bit different. Can you talk a bit about that?
So Gen Zs are more skeptical. Interestingly, they without mentioning the names, didn't meet them. They believe if you don't affirmatively say that you are doing this in the supply chain, that you aren't, and therefore that you're bad. The rest of us don't assume that, but that's a sort of important distinction. The second is they're more prepared in a way to act, advocate, push, be an influencer, speak on social, on behalf of or against anything. So they're active,
Yes.
let's put it this way.
And the other thing that came out of the research, which we thought was fascinating, is they differentially incorporate a brand's environmental record into their purchasing. They also, as I said, science was poor. The only cohort where science was middle to top was the Gen Zs. So the Gen Zs care. And I had a reporter, we were discussing the results, and I said, it's about the personal. And she said, well, of course Gen Zs care about the science. For them, it is personal. For the rest of it is not. And I thought that was a really important point. And then TikTok, which was not surprising, except to the brands, because the brands tend not to use TikTok to communicate the sustainability profile.
A huge miss.
Yeah.
50% of Gen Z, sort of 20-year-old, get their news from TikTok. And so you better play, and you better be straight, and you better show them supply chain and give them a chance to understand.
So you wrote this fantastic article in HBR recently over the past week or two that I can send out a link, worth reading. But you talk, so just as a teaser for this audience, we are going to be repeating this research, but next focusing on social issues around sustainability and how they compare to the environmental issues and how they compare to core category benefits. But you do discuss Natura. So for those of you who don't know Natura, it's a very large skincare company. It's an international skincare company that's based in Brazil. It's very much a Avon-type model, door-to-door type model. They had some backlash around inclusivity, but they doubled down and they actually increased their stock price. Can you talk about why they were successful and perhaps others haven't been, as we've learned recently?
So I visited these people 15 years ago in Sao Paulo, and they source in the Amazon, and they do a really good job of taking it from a place where they can actually create a business for the people who are, harvesting or whatever, and they also employ people who are in that bottom quartile and give them a chance to make money. And so the products are top class. Even when they're attacked, they stay the course. And theirs is a very genuine business proposition. And they've done really well with being, in a way, the rainforest properly expressed.
Great. And also, what I thought was fascinating in your article is that you do discuss among all your surveys that respondents expect business to perform core category benefits, deliver profits, employ people, deliver innovation. But you did talk about what respondents expect from a societal benefit, which was sort of a surprise.
So again, when I started out by talking about the role of business in society relative to government, here's a statistic. 85% of our respondents across the world say, we expect business to, employ people and make products, and the obvious. 75% we say, I want business to achieve societal ends. 85-75. It's almost the same. If you looked at that 3 or 4 years ago, it would have probably been 85-30. So it's a fundamental change in expectations of brands. I also want to use this as an opportunity to say what I have to say about DE&I. No retreat. Do not allow politicians to intimidate you into falling back on DE&I. It's a mistake. And the why is important. It's a business reason. It's not for purpose. It's because you want to employ very bright young people who are talented, and America's becoming and the world's becoming more diverse. Number two, consumers are looking at this. They're looking at whether you are vacillating, the Natura example being a good one. Stay in your place. Stand your ground.
Thank you. That's great advice. So last question before I open it up to the audience. What does the future in communications and sustainability look like? Silence or shouting? As a prognosticator.
I'm sure you have that experience to ask this question.
Yes, I didn't even think about
No, it's all right. I don't think either. I think a consistent expression of facts, but well expressed, because you need to have people feel that you are making progress, that you are committed to recycle plastic, whatever else, that you're going to change the supply chain. PepsiCo, for instance, is invested in local farming, Unilever in regenerative ag, like this. People, especially Gen Zs, want to see through the product. And listen, let's be clear. Again, Phil, you're here, but local media is shrinking. We're going to increasingly have to go direct to end user of information through either social platforms, companies' own channels, whatever, and be good with that. And TikTok, other places become important windows for showing how products should work well.
Thank you so much. I'd love to open it up to questions. Just
thank you, Richard.
Sure.
Very enlightening conversation. My question was one in terms of standards or regulations that you see, guiding the labels in the US. I know that EU is coming up and has come up with their own set of regulations. Because one of the things that we do often see is the lack of trust. When I speak to people, they don't want to buy a sustainable product because they just don't know if it's actually sustainable. And if you could give some more examples in terms of sustainability claims, do numbers work well? Does 50% less carbon emissions work well?
I'll tell you what works well. So let's look. What's the question? Ask it again. She wanted to know about labels. And is it valuable? The Forest Stewardship Council, developed by Her Honor, is a damn good example of something that's worked. So I can go to Lowe's or Home Depot and see this wood versus this wood. And I can affirmatively pick this and say, okay, it, arguably is sustainably harvested, and I can feel good fixing my deck. like this. And also Dolphin Safe Tuna, another good example. For Heinz, they came through it and onwards. So important.
And
Not sufficient, but important.
I can also say that I did look at the canned tuna category, and Dolphin Safe did drive significant performance and again became table stakes for the category. I also would say that there probably are fewer than a dozen global food suppliers, massive food suppliers. So when
Nestle, yeah.
yes, so when EU makes a change, they're not going to be doing different supply chains in the U.S. versus Europe. So it has massive impact, and I'm just delighted that they're doing it.
But one of the really interesting questions for UB school students is first mover. And, like on palm oil, pick the product, pick the problem. And there are going to be a lot of local competitors who are going to underprice you, not go along with the change in supply chain, and then you have a question. Are you going to make this an attribute that matters to the consumer, or are you just going to try and compete on price? I would suggest the former, and we have to make the case to the client to do that.
Hi. I wanted to ask about the flip side of the data on that first slide that was shared. Specifically, what's the effect of sustainability claims without those core category claims? Because I work for a company that makes clean hydrogen and clean chemicals. We have significant decarbonization benefits, but most often we can't help our customers make those core category claims. So what's your advice? Like, how have you seen that play out?
I can go back. I don't have the information. I can go back and run it that way, but I can tell you that across the 9 brands, and we didn't look at your category, an environmental claim, just in the absolute before we did this analytical tool that said the benefit of each incremental claim, environmental claims were in all 9 cases either the first claim or the first or second.
I would just tell you on a B2B case, because it sounds to me like you have that, you help companies achieve their COP28 or Paris goals. So go that way. Use LinkedIn. It's the best channel, B2B.
And I think we have time for one more.
As many as you want, I don't care.
Okay.
Is this on? Okay. Hi, everyone. Christina from How Good. Thank you so much for the conversation. I coined this term called first educator advantage. It's very close to first mover, but from what I've been seeing, the first to educate on an impact topic that does not yet hold mainstream materiality often enables the consumer to subconsciously question every other player that's not talking about it. Something that I've been seeing is in personal care, we're seeing no talc or no phthalates. And so I'm curious what you've been seeing. Are there any kind of subconscious first education happening with regard to sustainability that just because it's saying no X that the consumer is starting to
So on a positive side, so for instance, I remember Starbucks going to Rwanda and a couple other countries, Ethiopia, and developing the supply chain in a sustainable way. And it took real cash to help the farmers upscale and get scale. And that was really smart to do, 2015, 2016, and they've led the category. So that's a good affirmative example of first educator.
Great. And
The know something. I don't think that works as well. Randy's research is quite clear about, less science, more me. So a stamp, something simple would be good.
yeah, and certainly the clean beauty benefit, so no phthalates, no phosphates, has revolutionized personal care in general. But the reason that one works is because it's no harmful ingredients for human health, not
Simple.
just right. And I think we have time for one more. I see the man in the back. Why don't I go back there in the green? Okay. Okay. Then up here. Yep.
Thank you. Adam Wasserman from FinPublica. As we heard, the political attacks on ESG have really caused a lot of consternation, especially in the financial services industry, where you've seen, instead of greenwashing, you've seen green hushing, where people don't even want to talk about these issues anymore. My question is, what would be your message to people who are green hushing these days?
I think the bigger risk, interestingly, is with the S. There's a breaking up of the three. We're well governed. Look at our board. Look at our environmental commitments, but on the S, but just to address your point, if you can't get the three bundled, I would do them unbundled and be committed to the idea that you can measure all three. There's a myth out there that you can't measure the S. That's just not so. What is your percentage of diverse candidates applying for senior jobs, et cetera? You can measure all of these things, and we need to do that.
And you need to tell them. Richard, as always, it's such a pleasure, not without excitement. And thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you next time.